Nobody came to say goodbye when Faith Cooper turned 18. No family, no home, no one waiting for her. She left foster care carrying everything she owned in 2 worn-out bags and less than $500 in her pocket. Most people would have searched for a safe place to start over. Faith did the opposite. She spent nearly every dollar she had on a dying sunflower farm everyone else had abandoned. The fields were dead. The farmhouse was falling apart, and the land seemed beyond saving. But hidden beneath that cracked Kansas soil was a secret no one had uncovered for decades. A secret left behind by a woman Faith had never met. A secret that wouldn't just save the farm. It would change her life forever. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why the most valuable things in life are often hidden where nobody thinks to look. People often think being alone is something that happens overnight. It isn't. It happens one goodbye at a time. One empty seat. One unanswered call. One person leaving without looking back. For Faith Cooper, loneliness began before she was old enough to understand it. She was only 4 when her mother passed away after a long illness. The memories she carried were small ones, a warm hand holding hers, a soft lullaby before bed, the scent of lavender on a winter coat. A year later, her father disappeared. No note, no explanation, no return. Just gone. From that moment on, Faith became another child moving through the foster care system in rural Kansas. Over the next 14 years, she lived in 11 different homes. Some families were kind. Some barely remembered her name. None of them lasted. Every time she started to feel safe, another suitcase appeared at the foot of her bed. Another move, another goodbye. By the time she turned 18, Faith had learned not to expect anyone to stay. On the morning she aged out of foster care, a social worker handed her a folder, wished her luck, and gave her the final assistance check she would ever receive. $486. That was her entire future. Everything she owned fit into a worn backpack and a faded duffel bag. No family waiting. No home to return to. No one wondering if she arrived safely. For months, Faith drifted between small towns, taking whatever work she could find, cleaning motel rooms, stocking shelves, pouring coffee before sunrise. Then, one afternoon, while sitting in a nearly empty diner during a rainstorm, she noticed a small advertisement buried in the corner of an old newspaper. Dying sunflower farm for sale. Most people would have turned the page. Faith couldn't stop staring. The farm was located outside a forgotten town at the edge of the Kansas prairie. Years of drought had destroyed the fields. The farmhouse was falling apart. Everyone in the area believed the land was finished. But when Faith finally stood on that property a week later, watching the wind move through acres of dead sunflower stalks, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. A fragile, trembling kind of hope. The kind that appears when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. 3 days later, she spent nearly every dollar she owned and bought the dying sunflower farm. As darkness settled over the empty fields that first night, Faith sat alone on the farmhouse porch beneath a sky full of stars. She was terrified. She was broke, and she had never felt more uncertain. What she didn't know was that beneath the cracked soil stretching out before her, a secret had been waiting for decades, and that secret was about to change her life forever. The first week nearly convinced Faith she had made the worst mistake of her life. People imagine that hope feels powerful. Most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, hope feels fragile, like a candle trying to survive the wind. Every morning, Faith woke before sunrise and stepped onto the porch of the crumbling farmhouse, only to face the same reality. Dead fields, dry earth, silence. The sunflower farm stretched across the Kansas prairie like a forgotten dream. Acres of brittle stalks stood frozen in place, their heads bowed toward the ground as if they had given up years ago. The soil cracked beneath her boots. Dust followed her everywhere. Even the air felt thirsty. The farmhouse wasn't much better. The roof leaked whenever it rained. Several windows were boarded shut. The water pump groaned and rattled but produced almost nothing. Each evening, Faith sat at the tiny kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator, trying to make impossible numbers work. Food, repairs, fuel. Every dollar mattered. Every mistake mattered more. Sometimes she stared at the figures until the numbers blurred. Then she would remember something one of her foster mothers had once told her. Life doesn't care whether you're ready. At the time, those words had sounded cruel. Now they simply sounded true. During the second week, Faith began clearing the property. Not because she knew what she was doing, because she didn't know what else to do. She hauled away broken fencing, pulled weeds, removed dead branches, worked until her hands blistered and her shoulders ached. No one helped. No one offered advice. The townspeople mostly watched from a distance. Whenever she stopped by the grocery store, she noticed the looks. Some pitied her. Others thought she was foolish. One afternoon, while loading supplies into her truck, she overheard two older men talking. Poor kid. She'll be gone before winter. Faith pretended not to hear, but the words followed her all the way home. That night, she sat on the porch and watched the sunset disappear beyond the fields. Maybe they were right. Maybe this place really was dead. Maybe she was chasing another dream that would leave her disappointed. The thought scared her more than she wanted to admit, because the farm wasn't just land anymore. It was the first thing she had ever chosen for herself. The first thing that truly belonged to her. 3 days later, disaster nearly ended everything. The old water pump finally stopped working. Completely. Faith spent hours trying to fix it. Nothing. She checked every pipe she could find. Nothing. She searched online tutorials using the weak internet signal from her phone. Still nothing. As the afternoon heat settled across the prairie, she sank onto the ground beside the pump and buried her face in her hands. For a long time, she simply sat there, alone, exhausted, defeated. The wind moved through the dead sunflower stalks with a hollow whisper. Faith felt tears building behind her eyes. She hated crying. Life had taught her early that tears rarely solved anything. But some days the weight became too heavy. And this was one of those days. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. The words disappeared into the empty field. No answer came, only silence. Then something unexpected happened. A sound, so faint she almost missed it. Faith lifted her head, listened. Nothing. Then there it was again. A dull thud. Somewhere nearby. She stood slowly. The sound came once more. Not from the farmhouse. Not from the pump. From the field. Faith followed it between rows of dead sunflower stalks. The ground felt uneven beneath her feet. She moved carefully, listening. Thud. Another step. Thud. Then suddenly, crack. The earth gave way beneath her. Faith cried out as one leg dropped into a hidden opening. Instinctively, she threw herself backward and scrambled away, heart pounding, breath racing. For several seconds she simply stared. A narrow section of soil had collapsed, revealing a dark hole beneath the surface. She should have walked away. Most people would have. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you have nothing left to lose. Faith grabbed a flashlight from the truck and returned. The opening wasn't large, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cool air drifted upward from the darkness below. That alone surprised her. Everything above ground felt dry and lifeless. Yet the air rising from beneath the soil felt different. Damp, alive. Faith knelt carefully beside the opening. Then she heard it. At first, she thought she was imagining things. But the sound came again. Soft, steady, impossible. Water, not dripping, not leaking. Flowing. Her heart skipped. Slowly, she brushed loose dirt away with her hands. The opening widened. Darkness stretched below. The sound grew clearer. Water moving somewhere underneath the farm? Faith's pulse quickened. For years, everyone had said the farm failed because the water was gone, that the land had dried up, that nothing could survive here anymore. But if water was still flowing beneath the soil, then maybe the story everyone believed wasn't true. She stared into the darkness for a long moment, then climbed down. The drop was only a few feet. When her boots touched solid ground, she froze. The temperature was cooler. The air smelled of earth and stone. And somewhere ahead, hidden in the shadows, she could hear water moving. Real water. Faith switched on the flashlight. The beam swept across the underground chamber. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. The walls weren't natural. Someone had been here before. Wooden supports reinforced parts of the tunnel. Old markings had been carved into the stone. Lines, symbols, measurements, a system, a plan. Then her flashlight landed on something else. Something that made her heart stop. A rusted metal box resting against the wall, waiting in the darkness, as if someone had left it there for the exact person who would one day find it. Faith slowly stepped forward. Above her, the dying sunflower farm stood silent beneath the evening sky. But beneath the soil, a secret was beginning to wake up, and nothing would ever be the same again. Faith didn't sleep that night. The old metal box sat on the kitchen table beneath a single lamp, casting a long shadow across the room. Outside, the prairie wind brushed against the farmhouse walls. Inside, Faith stared at the box as if it might disappear if she looked away. For nearly 10 minutes, she simply sat there, waiting, breathing, trying to understand why her hands were trembling. Maybe it was excitement, maybe fear, or maybe it was the strange feeling that her life had somehow split into two parts. Everything before that afternoon, and everything after. Finally, she reached forward and opened the lid. The hinges groaned softly. Dust drifted into the air. Inside were several weathered notebooks wrapped in oilcloth, a bundle of yellowed maps, and a small leather journal tied with a faded blue ribbon. Faith carefully lifted the journal first. The cover was cracked with age. The pages smelled faintly of earth and time. When she opened it, a name was written neatly across the first page. Clara Whitmore. Faith had never heard the name before. She turned the page, then another, and another. Soon she forgot about the farmhouse, forgot about the darkness outside, forgot about everything except the words in front of her. The journal belonged to a woman who had owned the sunflower farm nearly 40 years earlier. As Faith read, Clara Winnie came alive, not through photographs, through her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. Clara wrote about droughts, crop failures, long days beneath the Kansas sun, but she also wrote about something else, something she called the river beneath the roots. Faith frowned. She had seen those words 3 different times before reaching the middle of the journal. The river beneath the roots. What did that mean? She kept reading. Hours passed. Then she found the entry that changed everything. June 14th. Everyone believes the farm is dying. They see what is happening above the soil. I see what is happening beneath it. The water still flows. If anyone ever finds this journal, remember this: the farm was never abandoned because the water disappeared. It was abandoned because people stopped looking. Faith sat back slowly. Her heart pounded. The words echoed inside her mind. If people stopped looking, she immediately reached for the maps. Several sheets unfolded across the table. Hand-drawn lines stretched beneath sketches of the farm. Measurements, depth markings, flow directions, notes scribbled along the margins. It wasn't random. Someone had spent years mapping an underground water system. Faith's eyes widened. The tunnel wasn't a coincidence. It was part of something much larger than she had imagined. Then she noticed a folded paper tucked between two maps. The paper looked newer than everything else. Carefully, she unfolded it. Only one sentence had been written. "If you're reading this, it means you stayed." Faith stopped breathing for a moment. She read the sentence again and again. Something about those words hit her harder than she expected, because her entire life had been a story of people leaving. Her father had left. Foster families had left. Friends had left. Even entire towns had disappeared from her life. But now she was reading words written by someone who seemed to believe staying mattered. Someone who believed perseverance was worth something. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears filled her eyes. Not from sadness, from recognition. It felt as though a stranger from decades ago somehow understood her. The next morning arrived too quickly. Faith hadn't slept more than an hour, yet she felt more awake than she had in months. She carried the maps back underground. The tunnel looked different in daylight. Less frightening, more purposeful. This time she followed the channel deeper. The sound of flowing water grew stronger. Her flashlight swept across the walls. More markings appeared. Numbers, arrows, symbols. Some sections looked almost engineered. Then the tunnel widened. Faith stepped into a larger chamber and froze. A narrow stream flowed steadily through the center. Crystal clear, so cold, alive. She dropped to her knees. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then she dipped her fingers into the water. Cold, real, moving. A laugh escaped her lips. A broken, disbelieving laugh. After weeks of fighting dry soil and empty pipes, she had finally found what everyone claimed no longer existed. Water. More water than she had dared hope for. Faith splashed some onto her face. The coolness shocked her skin. For the first time since buying the farm, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Possibility. Not certainty. Not success. Just possibility. And sometimes that is enough. Over the next few days, Faith became obsessed. She studied every page, every map, every note Clara had left behind. The deeper she looked, the stranger the story became. Clara wasn't simply a farmer. She had spent years creating an underground irrigation system capable of feeding the entire property. The system collected groundwater naturally and distributed it beneath the fields without wasting a drop. Decades ahead of its time. Brilliant. Simple. Hidden. Then Faith discovered something even more surprising. The final pages of the journal were different. The handwriting became shakier. More personal. More emotional. One entry caught her attention immediately. Most people think a farm is saved by rain. They're wrong. Land survives because someone refuses to give up on it. The same is true for people. Faith sat in silence after reading those words, because deep down she knew Clara wasn't writing only about the farm. She was writing about herself. And somehow, she was writing about Faith too. A young woman everyone had underestimated. A young woman trying to build a future on something others had already abandoned. That evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the prairie, Faith stood alone in the middle of the dying sunflower field. The wind moved softly through the brittle stalks. For the first time, she no longer saw failure. She saw potential. Beneath her feet, water flowed through darkness. hidden, patient, waiting, just like the farm, just like her. And as the last light faded from the horizon, Faith realized something extraordinary. She hadn't bought a dying sunflower farm. She had inherited a second chance, one that had been waiting for her all along. Faith noticed the change before she understood it. The farm hadn't changed. Not really. The fields were still brown. The farmhouse still leaned slightly to one side whenever the wind pushed hard enough. Most mornings still began with uncertainty. But something inside her was different. For weeks, she had been asking the same question. Can I save this place? Now, without realizing it, she had started asking a different one. What if this place is saving me? The thought followed her everywhere. Through the fields, through the farmhouse, even into her dreams. Every morning, she climbed down into the underground tunnel and studied Clara Whitmore's maps. Every evening, she returned with dirt on her hands and new ideas scribbled into a notebook of her own. For the first time in her life, Faith was planning months ahead. Not days, not weeks, months. That alone felt strange. Children who grow up moving from home to home rarely learn how to imagine a future. You learn how to survive tomorrow. You don't learn how to build next year. Yet somehow, the farm was teaching her exactly that. One morning, while buying supplies in town, Faith stopped at a small hardware store she had visited several times before. The owner was an elderly man named Walter Hayes. He looked to be somewhere in his late 70s. Tall, thin, quiet. The kind of man who seemed to have spent his entire life listening more than talking. As Walter rang up her purchase, his eyes settled on the farm map sticking out of her backpack. His hands froze, just for a second. Then he looked up. Where did you get that? Faith glanced down. The map. Walter nodded. That map? Faith hesitated. On my farm. The old man's expression changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. A memory waking up. Whitmore Farm, he asked softly. Faith stared. You know it. Walter didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly set down the receipt and walked toward the front window. For a moment, he simply looked outside, as if searching through decades. Then he smiled. I haven't heard anyone call it a farm in years. Faith felt a chill run through her. Did you know Clara Whitmore? Walter laughed quietly. Knew her? He shook his head. Half this county thought she was crazy. Faith smiled. So did she succeed? Walter's eyes softened. Depends on what you mean by succeed. That answer stayed with Faith, because it sounded exactly like something Clara would have written. The old man invited her to sit. For nearly an hour, Walter told stories. Stories nobody else seemed interested in anymore. Stories about Clara. Apparently, Clara had spent years trying to convince people the underground water system could save local farms during drought seasons. Most people ignored her. Some mocked her. Others simply didn't believe her. People wanted quick results, Walter explained. Clara believed in patience. Faith listened carefully. The words felt familiar, almost painfully familiar, because she knew what it felt like when people looked at you and saw failure before you had even begun. Then Walter said something she would never forget. Do you know what Clara used to tell people? Faith shook her head. The old man smiled. She said most folks quit because they confused being unseen with being unimportant. Silence filled the store. Faith lowered her eyes. Those words landed somewhere deep, because all her life she had felt unseen. In foster homes, in schools, in crowded rooms. People remembered the loud children, the talented children, the children someone came to pick up, Not the quiet girl carrying her belongings in a duffel bag. Not Faith. Walter continued. Clara used to say roots spend a long time underground before anyone sees a flower. Faith swallowed hard. Something tightened in her chest. She thought about all the years she had spent believing she was behind everyone else. Behind people with families. Behind people with support. Behind people who had been given a chance. Maybe she had been looking at her life the wrong way. Maybe she wasn't behind. Maybe she was still growing roots. When she finally returned to the farm that afternoon, everything looked the same. The fields, the farmhouse, the sky, yet somehow she saw them differently. The dying sunflowers no longer looked like proof of failure. They looked like evidence of survival. They had endured years of drought, years of neglect, years of being forgotten, and still they remained. Just like Clara had remained. Just like Faith had remained. That night, she sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset spread across the prairie. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep purple. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She wasn't thinking about her father, or foster care, or all the places she no longer belonged. She was thinking about what she was building. The realization frightened her, because hope always carries risk. If you hope, you can be disappointed. If you believe, you can be hurt. But perhaps the greatest risk was never believing at all. A few days later, Faith made a decision. She stopped treating the farm like a gamble, and started treating it like a responsibility. She created schedules, mapped irrigation routes, tracked soil conditions, studied Clara's journals every evening. The work became harder, but strangely, her fear became smaller. Not because she knew she would succeed, because she had finally stopped measuring success the way everyone else did. Success wasn't saving the entire farm overnight. Success was staying. One more day, one more week, one more season. Late one evening, after finishing another long day of work, Faith walked to the center of the field. The prairie stretched endlessly around her. The wind moved softly through the dead stalks. Beneath the soil, hidden rivers continued their quiet journey through darkness. Faith closed her eyes, and for the first time since she was a little girl, she felt something she had never truly felt before. She felt rooted. Not because she had found the perfect place, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because she had finally chosen something worth staying for. And deep beneath the Kansas earth, the first seeds of change were already beginning to wake. The first sign wasn't dramatic. There was no miracle, no sudden explosion of color across the prairie, no moment that made Faith drop to her knees and cry. Real change rarely arrives that way. Most of the time, it begins so quietly that you almost miss it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Faith was walking one of the eastern fields, notebook tucked beneath her arm, checking moisture levels the way Clara's journals had taught her. The sun had barely risen. A cool breeze moved across the prairie. Everything seemed ordinary. Then she stopped. At first, she thought it was a weed, a tiny patch of green pushing through the dry soil. Nothing remarkable, except there shouldn't have been anything growing there at all. Faith crouched down. Her pulse quickened. A small sunflower shoot stretched toward the morning light. Fragile, delicate, alive. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she laughed. Not because it was impressive, because it wasn't. Anyone else would have walked right past it. But Faith understood what that tiny sprout represented. Proof. After years of drought, after years of abandonment, something was growing. She gently touched one of the leaves. "Welcome back," she whispered. And for reasons she couldn't explain, tears filled her eyes. Over the next few weeks, more shoots appeared. Not hundreds, not thousands, Just enough. Enough to confirm that Clara had been right. Enough to remind Faith that life often returns long before success does. Every morning became an adventure. She walked the fields searching for new signs of growth. Each tiny sprout felt like a victory, a promise, a conversation between the land and the person stubborn enough to stay. The farm still looked dead from the road, but Faith knew better. Life was waking up beneath the surface, slowly, patiently, exactly as Clara had promised. The real opportunity arrived by accident, like most opportunities do. One afternoon, Faith was clearing an old storage shed behind the farmhouse. The building had been untouched for decades. Dust coated everything. Spider webs stretched between rusted shelves. Most people would have thrown everything away. Faith almost did. Then she found a wooden crate buried beneath a pile of broken tools. Inside were dozens of small glass jars, old labels, packaging supplies, and several notebooks filled with handwritten recipes. Faith carried everything back to the house, curious. That night, she sat at the kitchen table reading. The recipes belonged to Clara. Sunflower oil soap, hand creams, candles, natural skin balms, gift sachets, pages and pages of products Clara had once made using crops from the farm. Faith's eyes widened. The farm didn't need to wait years before producing income. Maybe there was another way. Maybe she didn't have to sell crops. Maybe she could sell what the farm represented. Hope, healing, a story. The next morning, she drove into town. Using part of her remaining savings, she bought a few supplies: wax, essential oils, cotton bags, labels. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just enough to try. The first week was terrible. The candles melted unevenly. The labels peeled off. The soap looked lopsided and strange. More than once. Faith considered giving up. Then she remembered Clara's words. Most people quit because they confuse being unseen with being unimportant. So she kept going, night after night, mistake after mistake, failure after failure. Slowly, things improved. The candles burned evenly. The packaging looked cleaner. The products began to resemble something people might actually buy. Then came the town's annual harvest market, a small event held every fall. Local farmers, bakers, craft makers. Nothing glamorous, just neighbors supporting neighbors. Faith almost didn't register. The booth fee felt risky. Money was already tight, but something deep inside told her to try. So she did. On the morning of the market, she loaded her truck with every product she had made: 30 candles, 20 bars of soap, a few handmade gift bundles, and a simple wooden sign, Faith's Sunflower Farm. The sign looked almost ridiculous, sitting among businesses that had existed for generations. Faith felt out of place immediately. Most vendors knew each other. Most had families helping them. Most belonged. Faith stood alone behind her table, trying not to look nervous, trying not to look like someone who had spent most of her life wondering where she fit. For nearly an hour, nobody stopped. People walked past, smiled politely, kept moving. Faith felt her confidence shrinking. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe she wasn't ready. Then an elderly woman approached. She picked up one of the candles, read the label, smelled it, then looked up. "Did you make these?" Faith nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The woman smiled. "They smell like my grandmother's farm." Something softened in her eyes. "I'll take 2. Faith blinked. "You will?" The woman laughed. "Of course." She handed over the money. The first sale, just 2 candles. But to Faith, it felt like someone had handed her proof that she belonged. Then another customer stopped. And another, and another. People asked questions, not just about the products, about the farm, about the story, about her. By afternoon, most of the table was empty. Faith counted the cash 3 separate times because she couldn't believe it. Nearly $700, more money than she had expected to earn in weeks. She sat quietly behind the booth after the crowd faded, holding the bills, staring at them, not because of the amount, because of what they represented. For the first time in her life, she hadn't survived by borrowing someone's kindness. She had created something, built something, earned something. That evening, she drove back to the farm as the sun dipped below the horizon. The prairie glowed gold. The young sunflower shoots swayed gently in the breeze. Faith stood in the middle of the field for a long time. The money would help. Of course it would. But the real gift wasn't financial. It was confidence. Direction? Purpose. For years, she had searched for a place that would accept her. Now she was beginning to understand something important. Maybe belonging wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you built. And beneath the fading sunlight, surrounded by a field slowly waking from years of silence, Faith Cooper smiled, because for the first time since she was 4 years old, the future felt bigger than the past. Faith didn't notice the transformation at first. Growth rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives disguised as ordinary days, one sunrise at a time, one small decision at a time, one moment when you choose to keep going even though nobody would blame you for quitting. The weeks after the harvest market became the busiest of Faith's life. Orders began arriving from neighboring towns, not hundreds, not enough to make her rich, but enough to keep the lights on, enough to repair another section of the farmhouse roof, enough to believe the farm might actually survive. Every morning started before dawn. Faith checked the underground water channels, recorded soil conditions, tended the young sunflower shoots, then spent her evenings pouring candles, packaging soaps, and answering customer messages. For the first time, exhaustion felt different. It wasn't the exhaustion of merely surviving. It was the exhaustion of building something. And strangely, she loved it. The town started noticing. Not everyone, but enough people. The same grocery cashier who barely looked at her months earlier now greeted her by name. Customers stopped her in parking lots. People asked questions about the farm. Some even drove out to see it themselves. At first, Faith felt uncomfortable with the attention. Children from foster care learn to stay invisible. Invisible feels safe. Invisible means nobody can reject you. But the more people visited, the harder it became to hide. One Saturday afternoon, an elderly couple arrived unexpectedly. They bought candles, walked through the fields, asked questions. Before leaving, the woman hugged Faith tightly. "You're bringing this place back to life," she said. Faith smiled politely. But later that night, those words lingered. Because deep down, she knew the truth. The farm wasn't the only thing coming back to life. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. Faith almost threw it away. Most of her mail consisted of bills. This looked no different. But something made her pause. Inside was a single handwritten note. Just 3 sentences. "I knew Clara Whitmore. The journals don't tell the whole story. Be careful who learns what you've found." Faith read the message 3 times. A chill spread through her chest. No signature. No explanation. Nothing else. Just those words. That night, she barely slept. The farmhouse felt quieter than usual. The shadows seemed longer. The wind sounded different. For the first time since discovering the tunnel, uncertainty returned. Who sent the letter? What didn't the journals reveal? And why should she be careful? The next few days felt different. Every strange sound caught her attention. Every unfamiliar vehicle passing the property made her look twice. Part of her felt foolish. Another part couldn't ignore the warning. Then something even stranger happened. One afternoon, while reviewing Clara's maps, Faith noticed a detail she had somehow overlooked. A section of the underground system ended abruptly. The tunnel maps continued, but several pages had been removed. Not torn accidentally, removed deliberately. Someone had taken them. Faith's pulse quickened. She spread every map across the kitchen table, compared markings, measurements, directions. The missing pages all connected to the same section beneath the western fields, the oldest part of the farm, the part Clara wrote about least. Suddenly, the anonymous letter felt much less mysterious. Someone knew something Clara had never fully recorded, yet life above ground continued, and the farm kept growing. By midsummer, patches of yellow began appearing across the fields. The first blooming sunflowers. Faith stood among them one morning and couldn't stop smiling. Months earlier, the land had looked dead. Now bright petals turned toward the sun. Tiny islands of hope scattered across the prairie. Visitors began taking photographs. Social media posts spread beyond the county, then beyond the state. One local newspaper published a feature story. Former foster youth revives abandoned sunflower farm. Faith nearly cried when she saw it. Not because of the article, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't being described as someone who needed help. She was being described as someone creating it. But success has a way of attracting attention. Not all of it good. 3 days after the article appeared, a black SUV pulled into the farm driveway. Faith watched from the porch. A man stepped out. Expensive clothes, polished shoes. The kind of person who looked out of place on a dirt road. He introduced himself as Richard Langston, a real estate developer from Wichita. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "I'd like to make an offer on the property." Faith laughed, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. The number he mentioned made her stomach tighten. It was more money than she had ever imagined possessing. Enough to buy a house. Enough to never worry about bills again. Enough to completely change her life. Richard smiled. Think about it. Then he handed her a business card and left. That evening, Faith sat alone on the porch watching the sunset. The offer sat beside her. Part of her knew how many foster kids would dream of an opportunity like this. Financial security, freedom, a fresh start. Everything she had spent years wishing for. Yet something felt wrong. The farm was finally thriving. Why would someone suddenly want it now? And why offer so much? The answer arrived later that night. Faith was organizing Clara's journals when a folded piece of paper slipped from between 2 pages. One she had somehow missed. Her breath caught. It wasn't a journal entry. It was a property sketch. Detailed. Precise. Marked with a red circle. The exact same section beneath the western field where the tunnel maps were missing. Across the top, Clara had written 4 words. The final chamber below. Faith stared at the page, then slowly looked toward the dark field outside her window. The mysterious letter, the missing maps, the unexpected offer, the hidden chamber. For the first time, she realized Clara's secret might be much bigger than an underground water system. And somewhere beneath the sleeping sunflower fields, something was still waiting to be found. Faith waited 3 days before returning to the underground chamber. Not because she lacked courage, because she understood that some discoveries change a life forever. And once you know the truth, you can never unknow it. The old map rested in her hands as she made her way beneath the western field. The same field that now shimmered with thousands of sunflowers stretching toward the Kansas sky. Months ago, the land had looked dead. Now it looked alive, and somehow so did she. The hidden chamber was exactly where Clara's final map said it would be. Dust covered the shelves. Wooden crates lined the walls. But what captured Faith's attention wasn't gold, or money, or some forgotten treasure. It was photographs. Hundreds of photographs. Young faces. Teenagers. Young adults. Smiling beside sunflowers. Standing in front of the farmhouse. Laughing around harvest tables. Faith slowly picked up one of the pictures. Then another. And another. A pattern emerged. Most of the young people looked familiar. Not because she knew them, because she recognized something in their eyes. The same loneliness she had carried for years. The same uncertainty. The same desperate hope. Then she found the letters. Boxes filled with them, each beginning almost the same way. Dear Clara. As she read, tears slowly filled her eyes. One letter came from a young woman who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Another came from a teenager who had lost both parents. Another from a young man who had spent months sleeping in his car. Each story was different, but all of them shared one thing. At some point, Clara Whitmore had helped them. Not with money, not with miracles, with belief. She gave them work, a safe place to stay. Someone who expected them to succeed. Someone who saw potential before they could see it themselves. Faith sat there for hours reading every letter she could, and slowly, the greatest secret beneath the farm revealed itself. The underground water system wasn't Clara's legacy. The sunflowers weren't Clara's legacy. People were. For more than 30 years, Clara had quietly transformed lives. One young person at a time. No awards. No headlines. No recognition. Just kindness, repeated often enough to change the future. Then Faith discovered Clara's final letter. The handwriting shook slightly across the page, but every word felt alive. If you are reading this, then you stayed. That means you already understand something most people never learn. Broken things are not worthless. They simply need time. The farm taught me that. The young people who came here taught me that too. If this place survives me, promise me one thing. Don't only grow flowers, grow people. Faith lowered the letter and cried. Not because she was sad, because for the first time in her life, everything made sense. The farm had never been trying to teach her how to grow sunflowers. It had been teaching her how to grow roots. Years passed. The seasons continued their quiet work, and so did Faith. The sunflower farm flourished beyond anything she once imagined. Every summer, thousands of golden blooms covered the prairie. Visitors traveled from neighboring states to see them. Photographers arrived before sunrise. Families spent weekends wandering through the fields. The little farm that nobody wanted became one of the most beloved destinations in the region. Local newspapers wrote about it. Travel magazines featured it. People called it a miracle. Faith never did. She knew miracles rarely happen overnight. What people called a miracle usually looked a lot like years of hard work nobody saw. Years of staying. Years of believing. Years of refusing to quit. But the achievement she treasured most wasn't measured in visitors or revenue. It began with a single spare bedroom inside the farmhouse. Then another. Then another. Eventually, Faith launched something she called the Sunflower House, a program designed for young adults aging out of foster care. The very people she understood better than anyone. Some arrived carrying backpacks. Some carried garbage bags filled with everything they owned. Some arrived pretending they weren't scared. Most were terrified. Faith recognized every version of herself in them. She gave them temporary jobs, a safe place to sleep, practical skills, mentorship, but most importantly, she gave them something she had searched for her entire childhood, someone who believed in them, One autumn evening, during the program's 6th year, Faith stood at the edge of the sunflower field beside a 19-year-old girl named Emma. Emma had arrived months earlier with nowhere to go. No family. No plan. No confidence. Now she was smiling. Really smiling. The kind of smile that only appears when someone finally feels safe. Emma looked across the endless sea of gold. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found this place. Faith felt her throat tighten, because years earlier she had whispered those exact words to herself. She looked toward the farmhouse, toward the fields, toward the life she almost never had. And suddenly she understood something beautiful. The lonely girl who once arrived with a backpack and $486 had become the person she needed when she was 18. She had become the proof that a difficult beginning does not require a difficult ending. As the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, golden light washed across the farm. The flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze. Faith stood quietly, listening, thinking about Clara, thinking about the scared foster child she once was, thinking about all the lives that would come after hers. And for the first time, she understood the true secret hidden beneath the soil. It was never the water. It was never the tunnels. It was never the farm. The real secret was this: every person deserves a chance to grow. Every person deserves a place to belong. And sometimes, the smallest act of belief can change an entire life. As the prairie wind moved through the sunflowers, Faith smiled, because she finally knew something with absolute certainty. She hadn't rebuilt her life despite being alone at 18. She had rebuilt it because she chose to stay. And because someone, long ago, had planted hope where nobody else thought anything could grow. Faith Cooper's story was never really about a sunflower farm. It was about what happens when someone refuses to give up. At 18, Faith had no family, no home, and almost no money. Most people looked at her and saw limitations. But Faith learned something powerful. Just because something looks broken doesn't mean it's beyond saving. The sunflower farm looked dead, yet beneath the soil, life was still waiting. In many ways, Faith was the same. For years, she believed she had been forgotten. But the strength she needed had been growing inside her all along. That's the lesson her story leaves behind. Not everything grows where people can see it. Sometimes the most important growth happens in silence, in difficult seasons, in moments when you choose to keep going even when nobody believes in you. Because one day, the flowers bloom. And when they do, people only see the result. They never see the roots that made it possible. If you're facing a difficult chapter in your life, remember Faith. Your story isn't over yet. Keep going. Keep believing. Keep growing. You may be closer to your breakthrough than you think.